Well, hello everyone. My name's Allison. I am the pastor of spiritual formation here at the Vineyard. Good to be with you. We have been centering our preparations for the Christmas season around this idea of the Christmas spirit and looking at ways that we get ourselves in the Christmas mood or spirit, whether that's like your favorite tradition that you do with your family, maybe it's making snow angels or baking a favorite cookie or putting your lights up on your tree. And so I was reflecting on what is it really that makes me feel really in the Christmas spirit. And I was chatting with a friend, I think last week, and she was telling me about an Advent calendar that she has for her kids. Do you guys do Advent calendars? Is that still a thing? I'm seeing some people not. Okay. And her kids actually unwrap a Hot Wheels for each little day of the week or day to anticipate when Christmas is coming, not the traditional candy and such. But I wanted to show you a picture of my childhood Advent calendar here. I get emotional when I see this. I just love it. It reminds me so much growing up with my younger brother, and my grandma actually sewed this by hand, and she stitched on all the little sequins, and I asked my parents when they were visiting recently, like, do you still have this? And they said, yeah, we do, and I said, I'd really like to have it. I don't know who you were planning to give it to, but me or my brother, but it's really special to me, and so they said, sure, we'll bring it next time we're in town. So my brother and I we just really look forward each day to taking a little ornament out of the pocket and sticking it up on the Velcro piece there to hang it on the tree. And I guess I said every day, obviously I had to share with my brother. So he was evens, I was odds, or the other way around. And so we kind of got into fights over who got to put the angel up at the end, because Christmas Eve was like really special. So that we got into arguments about. But otherwise, we had a pretty judicial system of getting the ornaments that we wanted and we liked best into the right pockets. So I would say, like, Andy, I'll trade you this candy cane if I can have the kitty cat, because I really loved the cat. Surprise, surprise, if you know me. Or I'd say, like, I'll give you the drum if I can have the sailboat. And so we would do these trades, and I told my parents that story. They're like, we had no idea that's what you guys did. We had no idea that was so special to you. I said, it really was. So I hope that you are finding ways to celebrate those fun things as families. And we, this month, are really focusing on the fact that Jesus and God's Spirit is the true Christmas spirit. And so we have been centering our time just around this passage out of Isaiah 11, and Emily read it earlier. And I'm going to read it again, but today we're just going to focus on this piece. This part of the text is talking about counsel and might. So let's hear this one more time from Isaiah 11. A shoot will come up from the stump of Jesse. From his roots a branch will bear fruit. The Spirit of the Lord will rest on him, the Spirit of wisdom and of understanding, the Spirit of counsel and of might, the Spirit of knowledge and fear of the Lord, and he will delight in the fear, or as Amos taught last week, the worship of the Lord. This is an exciting message I think God has for us this morning. It's also hard, so hang with me here. I want to show you, though, that this theme of seeking God's counsel is all over the Bible. It is in so many places. I don't have time to take you through all of them, but there's constantly, Old Testament through the New Testament, ways that God is telling us it's good to seek good advice, and your life will go well for you if you do that. And if you do not, it will be to your demise. There is advice to be had, and then there's actually like advice to avoid, basically, is what God is saying. And in fact, there is a whole section of the Bible that is called the wisdom literature. That includes the Proverbs and the Psalms. So just real quick, I want to show you these two verses. Proverbs 12:15 says, "The way of fools seems right to them, but the wise listen to advice." And so then we think, okay, I should take advice, but not just any advice, good advice. So we move on, Psalm 1, says, "Oh, the joys of those who do not follow the advice of the wicked." And so I love that. I love that the opening line of the Psalms is basically just spelling it out here. Don't listen to things that are wicked and evil. Listen and do and take the good, and your life will go well. And so I dug into the Hebrew a little bit, and this word counsel actually means pretty much what you would expect it to mean. It does mean advice in some places, but it can also mean purpose or plan. So when you hear that, you're thinking God's purpose and his plan for me. And then this idea of might is God's power, his strength, his ability to overcome, his ability to rise up and rise us up and to prevail over enemies. And I don't know if you knew this, but in the Old Testament, there is a lot of war happening. It is just battle after battle. It is God's people and not God's people clashing, like the true clashing of the kingdom. And so kings seek counsel and seek might and power. This is a thing that we see all over. They're just these two descriptors that are attributed to kings in the Bible. And the kings wouldn't just want any old person to ask advice from. They have highly respected counselors that they would ask, like, what is the best battle strategy here? How do I line my men up? What direction are they going to come from? What kind of weapons do we need? They would get all of this information. And I want to tell you about one in particular, King Saul. And so to do that, we're going to go to 1 Samuel, and this is out of chapter 10, starting in verse 9. And it says, King Saul is anointed. And this is what it says. As Saul turned and started to leave, God gave him a new heart. And all of Samuel's signs were fulfilled that day. And when Saul and his servant arrived at Gibeah, they saw a group of prophets coming toward them. And then the Spirit of God came powerfully upon Saul, and he too began to prophesy. So, this is one way that God gives counsel. It comes through his Spirit, and that is exactly what Isaiah is telling us. God has a spirit of counsel. And so King Saul gets anointed, God's Spirit comes on him, he starts prophesying, and for those of you who are like, what does that mean? It's just a way that the truth comes out. God says, this is true about you, this is true about the world, this is true about me, and they just begin to speak forth the truth. Sometimes it's about things that happen in the future. A lot of times it is just truth that we can live in the present that comes out too. And so God gives him this new heart, and then the Spirit comes on him. And King Saul gets victory after victory after victory. And the really interesting thing about this is God gives him very specific instructions about how to get these victories. And things are going well for him, but later in the story, actually what happens is God says, I'm giving you the means and the ends. Like, I will give you the tools to get the victory, and I will get you to the end of that to make that happen, to accomplish that. And at one point, Saul says, never mind, I don't like your strategy, God. I'm not going to listen to it. He still gets the victory, but the kingdom is actually ripped from Saul's hands. This is how this ends. God says, you didn't listen, and so the kingdom is stripped away from him. He actually takes King Saul out of power, puts David in power, and then David starts having the victories. And everybody can see this, and so Saul gets jealous. And so he's just tormented. He's tormented for the rest of the time because not only does he not to get to be in power, he's watching David have all of the success. And he becomes so misguided at one point that he actually tries to kill David. And David is like a loyal subject. David has done what he's supposed to do, but Saul is so misguided. He's getting ideas and counsels for places that are not God that he actually wants to murder his friend. And so when Saul can't hear God's voice, he goes to people and he says, hey, here's my plan. What do you guys think of it? And the people say, yeah, sounds good. I mean, have you ever done that when you're like, I don't know what to do, I have a decision to make, maybe I'll just like start talking, see what comes out, and then I ask someone, I go, does this sound good to you? And they're like, sure, that sounds fine. Saul did this, other kings do this, and we do this, but today I want to suggest to us that there is a better way to get your counsel. Saul had access to God's counsel, but he actually developed a pattern in his life of not listening. He decided that some things sounded intriguing, and it was just a little bit of that advice here, and a little bit here, and a little bit more here, and a little bit more here, and then eventually he can't even hear anymore. So the question for us today, I think, is who are you letting shape you? Who are you getting your counsel from? To whom do you give your ear? And I think maybe this morning, God would have us start to contend with some of the other voices that we let lead us down paths that are actually not good for us. And again, when we try to do this out of our own human effort, it doesn't always go well. Is this resonating? Am I the only person this happens to? Like, I just got this great plan. It sounds so awesome, and I'm just busting it to make it work, and it just falls apart. And often it's like, wait a minute. I have, just like Saul did, at my disposal, the voice of God, the Spirit of God, the counsel of God available to me, and I just can't hear it, or I don't hear it. And interestingly, for Saul, when you read the story all the way to the end, he ultimately goes to witchcraft. He tries anything. He's desperate. And you know what? Witchcraft is alive and well today. There are people who use that as a form of advice, a form of counsel, a principle to orient their lives around. But I would like you to think about the fact that there are other far more subtle forms of witchcraft that we have in our culture today. There are the counselors of the age, and these are way more acceptable. So, like, you see someone with a voodoo doll, you're probably like, okay, that's definitely evil, that is definitely not of God. But Satan would be far more subtle to sneak in other voices, and I bet you guys can guess what some of those are. The counselors of our age, the almighty Google. Right? When did the Eagles play? Click, there's my answer. Great. What's the weather going to be tomorrow? What should I wear? Great. Where's the best place to get this really cool Christmas gift? Great. Who should I marry? No, I haven't tried that one. I don't know if anybody else has. But it is fun to ask Alexa funny questions like that, right? So we have these robots in our homes, and we can access them and ask them questions and get their advice. But it's not just Google. It's Amazon, Facebook, Oprah, CrossFit. I'm really waiting for Josh to look up at me. I'm not throwing you under the bus, Josh. But these places where we think, let me just organize my life around this system of ideas or this way of being, and it will go well for me. And again, this is a hard message, but it feels significant today. If we're going to actually get the true counsel of God, the true Spirit that tells us who we are, how our life goes well, I think we need to heed the warnings that are in the Bible. And so, again, we've been reading out of Isaiah. Isaiah 11 says, the Spirit of counsel and might is coming on Jesus. And then a few chapters later, in chapter 30, this is the warning that we get. These people are stubborn rebels who do not pay attention to the Lord's instructions. They tell the seers, stop seeing visions. They tell the prophets, don't tell us what is true. Tell us nice things. Tell us lies. Forget all this doom and gloom. Get off your narrow path. Stop telling us about your Holy One of Israel. Because you despise what I tell you and trust instead in oppression and lies, calamity will come upon you. And suddenly, like a bulging wall that bursts and falls, in an instant it will collapse. This hit me so strongly in the sense of the timing of it all. So we have these quick fixes, the quick answers, the quick advice that we can get, but then this passage is telling you, if you build your protection, your security, your wall around you with those things, they come down in an instant. Almost as quickly as you got the advice, it will actually unravel your life. Just drops it. Do you guys have people in your life who are always wanting to give you advice? Who think that they know what's best for you? But it's actually not wise counsel. It's nagging. I think we need to pay attention to the voices that we are paying attention to, because often the people who are speaking are not wise themselves. And the bigger issue is probably that they're not orienting their life around Jesus. Maybe it's more about money or happiness or control or manipulation, or they just really need your life to look a certain way so that they feel better about theirs. Does this happen? Can you relate? Constantly. So if it's not Google and it's not Facebook, it might be people. Okay, so I promise there's some hope in this message. That sounds terrible. It's Christmas. We're like, where is the hope? Where is the hope? It is Jesus. Jesus is the King who is coming with all counsel and all might and all wisdom and discernment. And he says, I only do what I see the Father doing. And isn't that a sweet piece of advice, right? Jesus has decided, I'm going to orient my life around this single principle of discernment. And so it actually makes it really clear, because everything in the world is really murky. Like, I'm not sure how much of this I hear is true and which piece of this is true. And what if I try to marry up this idea with this one, and then maybe... And it just becomes chaotic and just like a ball of tangled yarn, and you don't actually know what is true. And Jesus here says, I get my counsel from the Holy Spirit. I only do what the Father is doing. And he had tons of people who needed his help. He had endless things to do. And so I can't even imagine, like, we're just trying to sift through what is the false news, the false advertising, the false ways of being. But what if you had, like, power to do endless good? And Jesus said, I can't do it all. I'm only going to do what I see the Father doing. And so when you think about the life of Jesus, God's Spirit, the Spirit of counsel, comes on him at his baptism. And he says, this is who you are. You're my son. I'm well pleased with you. And then Jesus is anointed for his ministry. And then at the end of his life, he says, actually, it's better if I go and I leave you the Holy Spirit, who will lead you into all truth, into all wisdom, into all counsel. And he even says, I'm going to pour it out on you. So it's not going to be hidden, that we have to grasp for it or work our way to it. It's like he's just pouring his Spirit out on us. And he does it without discrimination, no regard to gender, skin color, socioeconomic status, who your family was, who you know, who you don't know. He says, it is for all of you. You can have my Spirit, and my Spirit will counsel you into truth. Yeah, so that sounds really lofty, right? Like it is this huge concept that I think until you have experienced it, you're like, yeah, that sounds great, but I don't really know what the heck that looks like. And so I'm aware of this. So let's bring this down to the ground. I know that all of us have probably not gone to a counselor or a therapist, but we probably have some sense of what makes someone good at that. So think about that a minute and then just shout some stuff out to me. What do you guys feel makes someone a good counselor? Someone that you would lend your ear to? Hold on. A listener. Okay. What else? Unbiased. Tell me more about that. Can you say more? Yeah, so he said not necessarily trying to direct one way or another, but trying to help the person and not put your own agenda on them. Yeah. I see him. They tell you the truth. So good. They tell you the truth and not necessarily what you want to hear. Others. Patience? Yes. Yes. Because it takes a long time to get to the thing under the thing under the thing under the thing. Yes. Yes. Patience. It's good. Anybody else? Good question asker. Excellent. I heard another one up here. Compassion. Why do you think that's important? Yeah. They feel your feelings and act to your best interest. So you're not going to trust somebody unless you know they actually have your best interest at heart in the matter. It's not about them. Good. Anything else that feels really weighty in that sense? Empathy. How do you define empathy? This is good, guys.
Relating to what someone else is saying by sharing a similar experience that you would have, as opposed to putting a silver lining around what someone's telling you?
Yeah, I'm hearing two different things there. So there's a sense of I understand what you've gone through, and I can kind of bring that into my own experience. And then the silver lining thing is interesting. So do you mean by that, don't find the good in it right away? It's all going to be fine. There's something happy in your story, so we'll just go move to that real quickly. Yeah, so they might sit with you in your pain, sit with you in your processing. It's good. They're wise. Yes. Excellent. Excellent. That is what the Bible is trying to show us here. There are people who are wise and unwise. Excellent. We want wise ones. Yeah. This is good. They're trusted. They're vulnerable, maybe even. They companion you. I think you guys gave excellent language to some of this already. And the best counselors, it's funny, we think we go to our therapist to get advice from them. I have found the best counselors actually don't give me advice. What they're going to do is help me uncover what is real. Uncover what is real about my life, about my story, the good, the bad, the ugly. And they do offer, I think, an acceptance of what is true about me today, but then they don't say oh, you just got to stay there. Just sit in that, in your truth today. They help me envision a future that can be better. And they appeal to our sense of who we are and what we want our life to be. And isn't that how you see God's Spirit speaking in the Bible? He says, this is who you are. I'm not going to force you to do anything. I'm going to woo you with love. I'm going to tell you, this is how I made you. This is how your life's going to flourish. And I'm inviting you into this. And that's what I think a good counselor does. The best counselors are people who help you pay attention to the reality of your life. And help you maybe even, I would say, name the things that you want to be different. I had a good friend do this with me just this past week. We somehow got on the phone, and I had a really bad day, and I was just like, vent to you a second? And it was all the things, right? Time management and people and not doing what I want them to do, and my kid's crazy and not sleeping and all these things. And she just, like the presence that she held on the phone, even though we weren't even in the same room, there was just space. It was like, okay, let's take this blob of mess and just let it simmer for a second. And I think she asked me a question like, well, what do you really want in all this? What do you need to say? I hear you. Like, she validated my emotions. She said, that sounds terrible. That sounds really hard. I just want to tell you this, you're not crazy. This is actually really hard. But what do you want? What do you want to be different? What do you want to be better? And I think we can miss the spirit of counsel that comes in that slow work of God when we want the quick fix answer. So we can actually miss the spirit of counsel when we are looking for the spirit of answers. And I would just say to you today, just like Saul, when you decide to follow Jesus, he actually gave you a new heart. He gave you his spirit, and also, ever since that day, when you got his spirit and this new heart, there are actually opposing counsels in the world trying to derail you. That is just a truth. And so we actually need this spirit of God's counsel and power to sustain us and to move us on into this future that we want, into greater faith, greater hope, greater love. And I think the Holy Spirit works the same way. The Holy Spirit, as a counselor, helps us get present to the reality of my life. And then I can bring that into dialogue with Jesus. What is actually going on? And just like Danny said, counselors are patient. This is slow work. If you don't slow down, you will only get distracted by everyone else's life. Does that happen to anybody else? Like, I really need to figure out something about me, and I sit, but if I only give it 30 seconds, then I'm like back on Facebook, or I'm onto the TV watching this cool show because their life is easier to access than my own. It's just true. And we all have this problem. So I don't want you to hear guilt and condemnation. I just want you to hear this actually takes real work. But it is worth it to get this spirit of counsel. And I think when I actually get a glimpse of what is truest about me, that is when the Spirit is working. So a lot of us say, well, like, I don't know if I can hear the voice of God. I don't know if I can distinguish it from like the little voice in my head, which is me talking. And then sometimes it sounds like this actor that I really like, or I get song lyrics that it's like, oh, now we're listening to Beyonce and T. Swift and that. Oh, okay. That's not God. Who is that? It sounds really confusing, right? But I think the key here is that the Spirit, when it actually is the work of the Spirit, he's going to be more concerned with who you are becoming than having you get the right answers. So maybe that's a helpful metric for some of you. Like, he is less interested in you making a wise choice in this moment than he is about you just becoming somebody who makes wise choices. Yeah. And so there's a lot of grace there too, right? Because you can miss the boat over and over, and he's not like, oh, that was your one opportunity to become a wise person. Didn't get it right that time. Missed the boat. No, he's saying, let me form you. Let me speak to who you are, who I am making you, so that when choice A and choice B are presented in front of you, you can see clearly the wise and healthy and good way and walk in it. And I think these invitations come from God in a lot of different ways. Some of you are gut people. Some of you are like, I just know things. Like, I'm just really intuitive. Trust that if you are following Jesus and he made you that way, like, that could be him speaking. Some of you are like, I just get these weird thoughts that come into my mind. And I think, like, I was thinking about how I got to feed my cat and get milk from the grocery store, and then this thought comes in, and I think, like, oh, maybe I should take a nap. That's my favorite invitation from Jesus when I'm like, oh, I got all this stuff to do, and he's like, take a nap. I'm like, ugh. right? But we even resist it. Even when we hear his voice, we're like, nah, I got to do it in my own strength. I got to get my to-do list done. However you are made, here's what I want you to know. However you are made, God will speak to you in that way. There is actually no formula. There is no magic sauce that you can buy. Trust that the way he created you is the way that he will also speak to you. And to quote my good friend Elizabeth, who you're going to hear from in just a moment, she said to me, it's the spectrum of God's personality, Allison. Like the spectrum of God's personality. And that is such a fun thing for me to think about. Like, I am only one created human being of like all the millions and millions and billions of people on the earth who God also created. And so I think I have kind of a big personality, right? And my husband's got a big personality, and my kid has an even bigger one. Oh my goodness, she is like intense. So I think, okay, well, if God can relate to her and to me in this way, like he is so unlimited in his personality. Isn't that fun to think about? And so I think it's easy to compare and say like, well, that's how you heard from God, so I better like figure out how to do that too. I would say stop trying that. Just know who you are, get quiet in your spirit, say, God, would you speak to me? And I think you will. I mean, for me, I think I started with journaling. I know a lot of people hate journaling. I've actually recommended it to some of you, and you've been like, no, that's not me. So again, don't do it if it's not you. But for me, I actually had a hard time like just saying, okay, God, speak to me. And like, I'm waiting, I need your advice, I need your counsel, and nothing. He said, well, Allison, why don't you try talking first? So I get my notebook out, and I'm just like writing down, this is how I feel. These are the facts of my life, and I actually don't like them today. Or, I'm feeling so hopeful and joyous about this thing, God, and I know that you're in it, and so would you lead and guide me? And I just start pouring out my life on paper. And then as I did that, as I built that habit over and over and over, I start to go like, wait a minute, this is not just me. This is a conversation. There's actual dialogue happening. I'm hearing these things coming in that is not what I'm writing about, or it is, and it's a response to something. So for me, that's a reciprocal relationship. I actually hear God better when I feel like he has heard me. Maybe that says something about me. But I like to talk. But there's this idea that when I feel most listened to, then I do better listening, and then I can actually hear, like listening and hearing, not the same thing. Then I can actually hear what God is telling me, and then start to act out of freedom from that place. And like I said, that's only one way that it happened for me. There are as many ways to interact with the Holy Spirit as there are people. And so I want you to hear a couple other voices. So I'm going to invite up my friends Elizabeth and Rich Baxter. Come on down. Yes, give them a round of applause. Yeah, we've been getting to hear from a couple of you on your experiences with the Holy Spirit, and it is a hard thing to do. It's vulnerable. So listen with open minds, open hearts to you guys. Tell us, Elizabeth, I'll have you start. You want to come over here so we can see you? Yeah, grab that mic. Yeah, perfect. Yes, it is on. That's perfect. Do you want to start, Rich, or do you?
You want me to start?
Who wants to start? We didn't plan this part. Okay. So tell us who you are.
Hello.
And how long you've been
I'm
around.
Elizabeth Baxter. I've been the Vineyard. Oh, that's a whole story in itself. In fact, that's probably maybe, no, not the Vineyard, just coming to Jesus story that I'd like to tell first. But I've been in the Vineyard for lots of years, and God really called me here in 2 minutes of walking into an auditorium in Norristown, knowing that it was really the place where I was supposed to be. So that's pretty cool too. But anyway, can I tell my story?
Yes.
Because when you're describing about like how people are different, I think like for me, God has just done like some crazy interruption. And I want to share this with you because God is so kind. Like, I didn't deserve it. I didn't even understand it at the time. And he was he was just so gracious and generous. So I am in art school. I'm a teenager, and it's a little bit of a crazy place. So I have 2 roommates, both of whom are gay, and one's a boy and one's a girl. And they were a hoot. You know, we just thought we were like the coolest thing ever because we were just so avant-garde. And so they went for a trip, a vacation, and they came back and they're like, oh my gosh, we met these crazy guys on the train, these crazy people. And guess what? They're going to come and visit us, and they're going to tell us about Jesus. And they were like, ha, 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 like mocking, just like this was absurd and ridiculous. And I was like struck. I had been raised in the church, kind of nominally though. My parents didn't always reflect, I thought, a good picture of Jesus. And so I was very skeptical, and I had since stopped any interest in church, but I think I was still seeking. I was still a searching kind of person. And so I was wondering, what is this going to be? And I was also, of course, like in this art school place. And so my need for Jesus to be not like your Sunday school traditional brand of Christianity was really met when these 2 guys came in the door who were like hippies, long hair and crazy packaging, and like even like wrong theology. So the long story short is that one of them is the father of my son Timothy, who's sitting over there, and it's, you know, that's a bit of a wild ride too, a story, but that's who God used to bring me to himself. That is when I said yes to Jesus, even though we were kind of like also not doing good things, wholesome things, right things. God was still gracious in that. And it's always been the testimony of like, wow, God can use anything, anyone, and he's just so gracious in calling us. And so I hope that you are encouraged by that, because God used sin in my life to bring me to himself, my operation and in just doing all these wrong things. And even then he was so kind. And I became a believer and continued to follow. Wow, Timothy's father kind of went a different direction. So
Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Can you say more about when you heard the message of Jesus? You said, I was just like, and then you did that. Like, what was your reaction like? Do you remember?
well, it was counter to everybody else in the room. So that was a little risky right there, because I said yes. I wanted what they were talking about. Everybody else was like, yeah. And so it was not popular. And subsequently, I made a crazy decision. I left art school in like a week. Yeah. And my family was like really upset. My brother drove up from Philadelphia in one day to try to talk me out of it, and it was pretty radical. But I knew, I was like, art had really become a bit of a god and an idol. So I just wanted to do this other thing. And so it was like leaving everything behind and going for this thing that was in the body of this man who was so unusual.
That is beautiful. Thank you, Elizabeth. Here, stay up here a second while we hear from Rich. All right. And this is her husband, Rich.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me? Doesn't sound to me like
you can step up here so we can see you better too. You want to come into the light?
Yeah.
Into the light. Perfect.
So it's kind of funny. We didn't really discuss this too much, but my story is my first meeting of the Lord also. So I guess I'm a bit of an anomaly. I didn't come to know Jesus until I was 50 years old. And so I'd led a pretty, most of you here would not want to be my friend before, from 50 on back. And most of the people who I knew at that time would have no idea who I am today. But an event in my life, tragic, sad, caused me to turn to the Lord. I didn't know what else to do. And so I just prayed, but I didn't understand anything that was going on because I didn't know God. For 50 years, I didn't go to church. I didn't do any religious Christian things. And so what happened to me was like I had an encounter with the Holy Spirit, but I didn't even know that I had an encounter with the Holy Spirit. And it was like, I know that there are all kinds of different ways people come to the Lord, and there's a gradual change, but mine was instant. Like one day I was this guy, and the next day I was that guy. And I started smoking in college, and I smoked from the time I was 20 until I was 50. And that's 30 years of smoking cigarettes, and I'd done the I'm going to quit 100 times, throwing cigarettes out the window, and then 2 hours later going back and trying to find out where I threw them out the window so I could pick them up. But anyhow, like the very next day, I quit. I quit cold turkey. I don't know why people say this, but, curse like a sailor. I don't know if the sailors really curse a lot. But anyhow, I had a foul mouth. I was, different thoughts, odd thoughts, and I stopped cursing like the very next day. And my whole life changed, and I just started pursuing a different way, but I didn't even know that it was God who, made the change in me, and that it was so instant. I didn't realize that it was the Holy Spirit who had given me the power to change overnight.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. I hear so much in their story, and I hope you guys hear it too. Like, they weren't looking for God. He was looking for them. Do you hear that? I mean, and looking back, you can acknowledge the movement of the Spirit, but maybe you didn't see that in that instance. And the crazy thing is, I was like, why do counsel and might get paired together in this verse? Why is it the spirit of counsel and might? That's strange. But I hear the might. I hear the might in these stories of like in an instant, the power of God comes and transforms. And you didn't even say, yeah, well, you said yes. You said an audible yes, but that was about it. Probably, right? In that moment, like, okay, that's all it was. This resonates with me. I want it. And you're like, why am I a new guy? I have no idea. And I think when we were chatting, you said, I just woke up the next morning and it was like all the desires to be that old person were just gone in a moment. So thank you guys for just being this beautiful picture of that. Give them a round of applause. Yes. Yeah. Great. Oh, so good. So as you can see, interacting with the Holy Spirit is very simple and it's very complex. It is very, very personal and it's very universal. It's not withheld from any of us. And again, that's because Jesus died, rose again, said, I am leaving you, but I'm giving you something better, which is the Holy Spirit, and you have access to him. And so let's just stand now. And let's try this on as we transition.